Good morning, everybody. I'll try my best to speak with this thing. I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. I'm not very used to speaking like this. But I'll do my best this morning, okay? I want to, first of all, thank Pastor Koju for putting this together. Let's give him another round of applause. Come on. And I want to thank you all for coming, because if you didn't come, it would be very embarrassing to speak to an empty hall. So give yourselves a round of applause. But quite frankly, what we're doing today is one of the things that we should be doing in Nigeria at this point in time. Nigeria needs a lot of help. Nigeria needs a lot of involvement. And above all, Nigeria needs a lot of help from the church, from the body of Christ, which is the foundation from which this has come forth. So I'm hoping that going out from this place today, we'll take a few things back home. And it's not just going to be coming here, listening to good speeches by great people, but thinking about what to do and taking a few decisions and a few steps as to which way we're going to take Nigeria, how we're all going to come together and make Nigeria work. I was sharing with Sister Ighodalo just now as to how a lot of things come together by good people, but somehow or the other the sustainability, the persistence to see it through becomes a challenge. And the Bible says that he that endureth till the end, it is he that wins. So I'm hoping that after all this talk and talk, a few of us will gather together and decide to do something about Nigeria, and decide to sacrifice and pay the price for Nigeria, and decide that the common good of all is better than the simple good of one. And unless there's that kind of sacrifice, unless there's that kind of intent, unless there's that kind of commitment to the well-being of Nigeria, we're still going to be talking and talking and talking. A lot of people talk all the time. They have great ideas. They have all the solutions. But it remains on the table of speech. When it is time to do something and to act, a lot of people don't want to get involved. So the first thing I'm going to be asking you all today as you leave this place is that you must get involved. You must get involved in the Nigerian question. You must get involved in the leadership of Nigeria. You must get involved in the direction in which Nigeria is going. One of the things that I personally regret the most was that in 1999, when Nigeria was transiting from military to political leadership, a lot of us stayed behind. A lot of us stayed in the churches. A lot of us stayed in our homes, and we allowed people who are less qualified to take control of our nation. And now we're all groaning under that kind of leadership, and these things must change. So today I'm going to be speaking to you in the next 40 minutes on the subject, transforming Nigeria. Transforming Nigeria. Transforming Nigeria. Anybody who knows me for 2 minutes knows that I am extremely passionate about Nigeria. I'm extremely passionate about Africa. I'm extremely passionate about people. I'm extremely passionate about people becoming who they really are supposed to be, and nations becoming what they really are supposed to be under the watchful hand of God. So when Pastor Koju invited me here and gave us the broad outline of what it was all about, and then said to me, what would I like to speak about, it didn't take me 2 minutes to send back to him and say, I'd like to talk about transforming Nigeria. And I'm going to start briefly from a historical perspective. And I think some things will be coming up on the screen and the PowerPoints, and you can just follow as we speak. Okay, Nigeria, the thing called Nigeria, is the most populous nation in the entire African continent. The most populous nation in the entire African continent. It is the largest collection of people of the dark skin. It is the largest collection of people of the dark skin. 1 out of, I think, every 4 persons of the dark skin is a Nigerian. With an estimated population of about 170 million people, it is in fact rated as the 8th most populous nation in the world. So you can see that with that amount of people, Nigeria is a lot of energy, is a lot of power, is a lot of strength, and a lot of depth. People began to settle in Nigeria about 9,000 years before Christ, but it wasn't until the 9th century that we began to have a formalized form of governance in what they call the Kanem Borno Empire. In the 16th century, the Europeans, especially the Spanish and the Portuguese people, began to arrive in Nigeria, and shortly after that, the British came, and then they began to form what was first of all the Northern Protectorate, and then the Southern Protectorate, and about 100 years ago next year, they joined them together, amalgamated them, and it became the Protectorate of Nigeria under the rule of the King of England, and then under the British rule. And then shortly after the Second World War, the agitation for rulership and independence came, and in 1960, about 53 years ago, Nigeria became an independent nation. I'm sure a lot of you know this history. Nigeria's economy, in spite of everything, is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Everybody all over the world now know that Africa is the last continent to be industrialized. Africa is the place where you can make as much economic benefit as you can, and a lot of people are coming into Africa. Nigeria comprises of more than 250 ethnic groups. There's still a bit of a debate about it, but the most populous are the Hausa Fulani, reputedly about 29%, the Yoruba about 21%, the Igbos about 18%, the Jaws about 10%, Kanuri 4%, Ibibio 3.5%, and the Thieves about 2.5%, and so on and so forth. Right, over the years and over the centuries, Africa and Nigeria have been characterized by a series of what you call challenges, or what my slide calls the African crisis. The African crisis. And the African crisis comprises about 4 or 5 things. Okay? Abundant in natural resources. Abundant in natural resources, yet it remains extremely poor. Abundant in natural resources, yet the people within that resource structure remain extremely poor. Africa has large quantities of natural resource, diamonds, oil, gold, iron, cobalt. A lot of us have what you call this thing that you used to call people, what they call it, mobile phones. Mobile phones. Most of what you find in your mobile phone is actually harvested from the earth of Africa, but hardly in any place in Africa is a mobile phone manufactured. Most of the cobalt you find in your mobile phone actually comes from Africa, but no mobile phone is being manufactured in Africa. I used to crack a joke many years ago, and I used to say that Nigeria or Africa is perhaps the only place in the world where you grow yams in your backyard. You grow yams in your backyard, you harvest those yams, and then you send the yams to London, America, and then somebody pounds it into pounded yam and brings it back to you. It's only in Africa that that kind of thing happens. It's only in Africa that you have oil in your backyard, you harvest your oil, and then you send it to Europe, you send it to America, and then you import petrol. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. It's only in Africa that you have cocoa, and there's nobody in Africa making chocolates or making sweets, as it were. Most of the sweets and chocolates come from Europe. And it's only in Africa that you have so much abundance and so very little in the hands of people. Nigeria on its own part is also blessed with natural gas, petroleum, tin, iron ore, coal, limestone, niobium, lead, zinc, vast arable land, vast land in Nigeria. Many years ago, I went to Israel. I went to Israel for the first time. And as I was going through the arid land of Israel, I saw a lot of plantations, a lot of crops, a lot of oranges. It was an orchard full of oranges. And there were big oranges on the trees. So I turned to my tour guide and I said, what kind of people are you in Israel? How can you be allowing these oranges to remain on the tree? I was imagining that orchard in Nigeria and in my village. And I knew that everybody in my village would bombard the orchard and pick the oranges. And the Israeli man turned to me and smiled. He says, we've taken the best of the oranges. Those ones are the worst. We cannot be bothered. It's too expensive to pick them up. So we've left them on the tree just to fall down. It's cheaper for us to fall down. And I said to myself, oh my God, if only I could move this orchard into Nigeria, then it will solve a few problems. He says, well, how do you guys do in Nigeria? I said, we have a lot of problems making these sort of things happen. And he laughed at me and says, you Nigerians are very funny people. He says, in Israel, we have to beg the ground to yield its increase. We have to titrate the floor. We have to put water on every tree, one by one, drop by drop. It says every bit of water in Israel is recycled. It says the water you drink has just come from your toilet because we recycle the water. We have to beg the ground. He says, but in Nigeria, you throw a seed outside, come back in 2 minutes later, and the seed has begun to grow. He says, how can you have so much and yet have so little? This is the question of Nigeria. This is the challenge of Africa. You know, somebody was saying that aside from oil, there's at least 33 or 34 different kinds of minerals and resource that could do as well or even better than oil. I was going through Kogi State a few months ago for someone's funeral, and growing out of the land were pieces of what you may call tile, what do you call this thing? Granite was just growing out of the soil. Marble was just growing out of the soil. And I said to my friend, how can you in this place have so much granite and marble just growing and nobody is doing anything about it? A lot of us grew up in a Nigeria without oil. We grew up in a Nigeria when I was studying geography in primary school. We're talking about the groundnut pyramids. We're talking about the cocoa farms. We're talking about the palm kernel. We're talking about the rice. We're talking about the cotton from northern Nigeria. But today, nobody talks about any of those things, okay? A lot of us grew up on these things. We didn't have oil initially when we were growing up, but we grew up in a Nigeria where the phones worked, where the water system worked, where you paid your bills, where there was hardly any form of armed robbery. When I was growing up in Nigeria, we didn't have walls or fences. We didn't have anything in the place where I grew up in. You moved freely through the streets of Ibadan where I grew up. If you caught anybody stealing, it was a petty thief who was stealing some mangoes from the market or something like that. And it wasn't this kind of thing that we have, all of us living behind prisons, okay? There is a resource map of Nigeria out there, shows where the cocoa should be, shows where the cotton should be, shows where the rubber is, and so on and so forth. Let me give you a few statistics very quickly about Africa and possibly Nigeria. 80% of the sub-Saharan population is living on less than $2.50 per day. 80% of us are living on less than $2.50 a day. And $2.50 in America cannot buy a liter of gas. Just barely buys a liter of gas. Maybe it will buy you 2 or 3, 4 bottles of water. And that's the kind of money that a lot of us are living on. The literacy rate in Africa is 63%. 63% of the people in Africa are having challenges with literacy, as it were. 31 countries reported child mortality rates of at least 10% in 2009. All of these countries were African countries except for Afghanistan. Only 16% of people in sub-Saharan Africa have access to potable drinking water through a household connection in their taps. Only 16% can switch on the tap and water will come out. I remember many, many years ago, the first time I went to England, I think it was about 1978. That was the first time I went to England all by myself. And my uncle that I was staying with was staying in a block about 6 stories high. So we were staying there in the block with him. And then about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke him up And I said, Uncle, I need to go downstairs and fetch some water before the taps run dry. So let me go downstairs and fetch some water and quickly have